My lady, would you honor me by becoming my wife?
You reached far above your station. How dare you imagine I would marry you? Go and find a lady who belongs in your world, because you certainly do not belong in mine.
Look, she's still waiting for the perfect husband. Perhaps perfection forgot where Hawthorne Manor is. Smile. They must never see how much those words
No
still hurt.
one knew that decades earlier, she had been the most desired
hoping for
woman
the
in
perfect
England.
If I cannot have your love, may I at least have your friendship?
No. If I allow you to remain, you'll mistake pity for hope. So leave, and next time seek a woman who can return your feelings.
Or that every choice
I
she
offer you
believed
only
was
an honest
wise
heart.
had slowly
An honest
become the
heart.
greatest
You
regret
mistook
of
my
her
kindness
life.
for affection.
Because
never
sometimes
embarrass yourself
life
like this
doesn't
again.
punish the wicked. Sometimes it quietly punishes those who wait too long.
I remember
Before we begin this unforgettable story, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. If you enjoy heartfelt historical dramas filled with powerful lessons, love, regret, and unforgettable story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Now, let me tell you the heartbreaking story of the woman who rejected every noble suitor while
I
waiting
have
for the
loved you for
perfect
years.
man,
Then you have
only to
wasted
discover
years that could have been
that
spent
perfection
finding someone
had been
worthy of your
standing at
devotion.
her door
I was never
all
that woman.
along. Lady Arabella Hawthorne stood at the tall windows of Hawthorne Manor, watching the last carriages of the season roll away down the gravel drive, their wheels crunching softly against stones still damp from morning rain. The estate's garden stretched below her, roses trimmed into perfect rows, their petals heavy with dew, the air carrying the mingled scent of lavender and fresh-cut grass. She was, by every account whispered across the county, the most graceful woman to grace a ballroom in a generation. Beautiful without vanity, clever without arrogance, and warm toward servant and
My
lord
lady,
alike, she had
you would
spent
make me the
another
happiest
season
man in
fending
England.
off proposals
hope you
from men
become
who
that
saw
man.
in her not a person,
But it will
but a
never be
prize.
beside me.
Her father, Lord Hawthorne, a widower who had raised her alone since her mother's
Perfection has never
passing,
visited any
watched
marriage.
her from his study
Then
doorway
mine shall
with
be the
quiet
first.
pride tempered by
pray life
private
agrees with you.
unease. He had never once told her to marry against her wishes, though he sometimes wondered, over his evening brandy, whether her daughter had built an idea of love so flawless that no living man could ever meet it. He kept these thoughts to himself, choosing instead to trust her judgment, even as the years slipped by and the invitations grew fewer. It was her closest friend, Lady Helena Whitmore, who spoke the truth aloud.
Love isn't discovered perfect. It's built. Then I'll wait until heaven introduces me to the man I was meant to build it with.
They sat together in the drawing-room, teacups cooling on the small mahogany table between them, the fire crackling low in the hearth. Helena's voice was gentle but firm as she reminded Arabella that love was rarely the sudden, radiant certainty found in storybooks. It was, she said, something built slowly, through disagreements mended and small sacrifices made, through choosing someone again each morning rather than being struck once by fate. Arabella only smiled, tracing the rim of her cup with one gloved finger, and said she would rather wait a lifetime than settle for anything less than the love heaven had written for her. That evening, at the final gathering of the season, Edmund Ashcroft approached her beneath the glow of the ballroom's candlelit chandeliers. He was not a man of grand declarations, a scholar from a respected family, but unassuming one. He spoke with the careful humility of someone who had thought deeply before speaking at all. He did not ask for her hand outright, nor promise devotion he had not yet earned. He asked only for time, for the chance to prove himself slowly, through patience rather than persuasion. Arabella looked at him with genuine warmth, for she liked him more than she let herself admit, but she shook her head softly. Kindness, she told him, however sincere, was not the same as certainty, and she could not build a marriage on hope alone. Edmund accepted her answer without bitterness. He bowed with the same quiet dignity he had carried into the room, thanked her for her honesty, and turned to take his leave. But before he crossed the threshold into the cold night air, he paused beside Helena, who stood near the doorway with her shawl drawn close against the draught. He leaned toward her and spoke a few words too low for Arabella to catch over the murmur of departing guests and the soft strains of the string quartet still playing near the far wall. Whatever he said, it altered something in Helena's face at once. Her polite smile faltered, replaced by an expression of startled understanding, as though a door she had not known existed had just been quietly opened before her. She glanced toward Arabella, who remained unaware, laughing lightly with another departing guest, her heart untouched by whatever promise had just passed between the scholar and her dearest friend. Helena said nothing. She only watched Edmund disappear into the darkness beyond the manor's grand doors, the cold air rushing in briefly before the footman closed them again, sealing the warmth of the ballroom back inside, along with a secret Arabella had no idea had just been born.
The years slipped past Hawthorne Manor with a quiet, relentless speed that Arabella barely noticed until she looked up one autumn and realized how much had changed. Each season brought fewer callers to the drawing room, fewer bouquets left at the door. The gentlemen she had once turned away found their way into other parlors, other lives, marrying women who had not waited for certainty at all. At the Harvest Festival, she watched Charles Pemberton lift his small daughter onto his shoulders, both of them laughing as she reached for a paper lantern strung between the oak trees. At Sunday services, she sat 2 pews behind William Carrow and his wife, their infant son fussing softly until his mother hushed him with a tenderness that made Arabella's chest ache in a way she could not name. None of these men held any resentment toward her. They greeted her warmly, asked after her father, spoke to her as an old friend rather than a lost opportunity, and their kindness left her wondering, quietly and privately, whether happiness had always been a far simpler thing than the perfect certainty she had spent her life pursuing. Hawthorne Manor grew quieter with each passing year, its halls echoing more with memory than with voices. Her father's strength faded slowly, his once steady hands trembling around his teacup, his walks through the garden growing shorter until he no longer left his chambers at all.
Promise me.
In his final weeks, he took
You
her
won't spend
hand
your life
and told
waiting
her, more than once,
certainty.
not to spend her life waiting for a certainty that might never come. He never explained why the words carried such urgency, and Arabella, grieving even before his passing, did not think to ask. After he died, she found herself alone in his study, surrounded by the smell of old paper and pipe tobacco that still clung to his chair. Sorting through his desk, she discovered a locked drawer, and inside it boxes she had never known existed. They held every proposal she had ever declined, but not only that. Beneath them lay dozens of letters never delivered, from suitors who had written to her afterward, asking for one more conversation, one more chance, or simply thanking her for the brief time they had known her. Her father had kept them hidden, believing he was sparing her from confusion and doubt. Near the bottom of the last box, her fingers found a letter in handwriting she recognized instantly as her mother's, written in the delicate looping script she remembered from childhood. Her mother had written it years before her death, gently warning that the happiest marriages were rarely born from flawless beginnings, but from 2 imperfect people choosing one another each day. Arabella read it twice, her hands trembling, before she noticed one final envelope resting beneath it, sealed still, the wax unbroken after all these years, addressed in Edmund Ashcroft's careful hand. Arabella's hands shook as she broke the seal, the wax cracking away in small dark pieces that fell onto her lap unnoticed. Edmund's handwriting filled the page in careful, unhurried lines, the words of a man who had clearly written and rewritten them many times before allowing ink to touch paper. He told her that every spring, on the first evening the season turned warm, he returned to the old willow beside Ashcombe Lake, the same tree beneath which they had once talked for an hour about nothing of consequence and everything that mattered. He went there, he wrote, not expecting her to come, but hoping that if she ever wished to speak with him again, she would know exactly where to find him. He promised her nothing grand, only that he would keep returning until the hope in his heart finally wore itself away. She read the letter twice more before rising from her father's desk, her grief for a moment overtaken entirely by a desperate, urgent need to reach the lake. She ordered the carriage prepared at once, her heart pounding harder with every mile of countryside that passed the window, the hedgerows and stone walls blurring together as she willed the horses faster. When at last the carriage stopped near the water's edge, the willow stood exactly as she remembered it, its long branches trailing into the still surface of the lake, catching the last amber light of the setting sun, but the space beneath it was empty. An elderly gardener tending the nearby path looked up as she approached, and something in her face must have told him everything, for he spoke gently, almost apologetically. Mr. Ashcroft had departed that very morning, he explained, having accepted a permanent post overseas after years of uncertainty about his future in England. He had returned to this willow every spring without fail, the gardener said, watching him grow older each year while he waited beneath its branches for someone who, as far as the old man could tell, had never once come. Arabella stood very still, the evening breeze moving through the willow's leaves, the lake water lapping softly against the muddy bank, and felt something inside her chest quietly break. For a moment she considered ordering the carriage after him, chasing down whatever ship or road might still carry him within reach, but she stopped herself, understanding with sudden clarity that she had no right to ask him to abandon a life he had finally built for himself, not after she had spent years choosing doubt over the devotion he had freely offered her. She watched from the rise of the hill as a distant carriage, perhaps his, perhaps only a stranger's, disappeared into the fading light beyond the fields, and she understood then that some doors, once closed, could not be opened again by wishing alone. The years that followed brought a different kind of season to Hawthorne Manor, one measured not in suitors but in whispers. Younger ladies she had once mentored at charity gatherings began hiding smiles behind their painted fans, murmuring to one another that Lady Arabella was still waiting for a husband who existed only in storybooks. She held her chin high whenever she heard it, offering the same warm courtesy she always had, but alone in the manor's quiet rooms at night, she returned again and again to the boxes of hidden letters, reading them by candlelight until the wax pooled low, finally understanding that nearly every man she had turned away had never promised her perfection at all, only the steady, imperfect gift of genuine companionship.
Decades passed, and Hawthorne Manor still stood upon its hill exactly as grand as it had always been, its stone facade unchanged, its gardens still tended with the same careful devotion, yet within its walls a silence had settled that no fire or candlelight could ever quite dispel. The nursery on the upper floor remained as it had been prepared so many years before, the small cradle draped in linen never used, the walls painted a soft yellow for a child who never came. The Hawthorne name, once spoken with pride throughout the county, would end with Arabella, and she had long since made peace with the knowledge that the halls around her, filled with portraits of ancestors and echoes of laughter long since faded, held only memories now, and choices that could never be called back. In her later years she turned her attention outward, finding in charity what she had never found in courtship. She opened her home and her purse to orphaned children and widowed mothers throughout the county, visiting the almshouses herself rather than simply sending funds, sitting with children who had no mothers to braid their hair or fathers to lift them onto their shoulders at harvest festivals. In their small hands and hopeful faces she found a purpose that steadied her, even as the weight of her own choices remained something she carried quietly, privately, in the hours before sleep. Before her death, feeling her strength finally beginning to fade as her father's once had, she sat at the same desk where she had once discovered his hidden letters and wrote one final letter of her own, addressed to no one in particular and to every young woman who might one day read it. She wrote that perfection was never real, only a comforting illusion that kept hearts guarded against the risks love always demanded. True love, she explained, grew slowly through patience and forgiveness, through carrying another's burdens as one's own, through ordinary mornings and quiet evenings that became extraordinary simply because they were shared. When she passed, her solicitor gathered the household staff and read her letter aloud in the very room where she had once declined so many proposals, his voice carrying through rooms that had waited too long for the sound of children. As she had requested, Hawthorne Manor was transferred to become a home for orphaned children, its silent halls finally destined to fill with the laughter and small running footsteps she herself had never known within them. Some time after the manor changed hands, Helena, now grey and slower in her steps, made her way once more to the old willow beside Ashcombe Lake, the branches longer now, trailing further into water that still caught the evening light exactly as it had always had. She stood there a long while before speaking softly to no one but the tree and the quiet lake, revealing at last a truth she had carried for decades. Edmund Ashcroft, she said, had never married either, had spent his own life abroad in the same quiet solitude Arabella had known at home. Two hearts that had loved each other faithfully across an ocean and a lifetime had never found the courage or the timing to close the distance between them. The willow remained standing beside the water long after Helena walked away, bending gently in the wind as it always had, a silent witness to the truth it seemed to hold within its branches, that the deepest regrets are rarely born from loving the wrong person, but from waiting far too long to choose the right one at all.